everyone. Welcome to A Busy Lady's Story Spotlight, where we celebrate bold creatives and storytellers who inspire us to keep creating no matter where we are in our journey. Today, I am thrilled to introduce someone who's been shaping the comic book world for over 4 decades, T.C. Ford. From getting published at just 15 to becoming the last editor-in-chief of Charlton Comics to launching his own imprint, United Comics, TC's story is a masterclass in passion, persistence, and creative evolution. We'll talk about everything from surviving industry shifts to embracing the writing side of comics, TC's take on AI, and more. Whether you're a creator, a comic fan, or just someone chasing your own dream, you're going to walk away from this one inspired. So let's dive in. TC, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your origin story. How did comics first enter your life? Was there a particular book, artist, or moment that hooked you?
It's weird. Actually, I when I was a kid, I mean, like little kid, elementary school, um, I had a teacher that worked for Scholastic Books, and he wrote children's books, and I thought that was like the best job in the world. I wanted to do that, and I figured I had a good perspective on it because I was still a kid. So, um, but the thing with children's books is you can write the stories, but you need an illustrator. So I loved writing, completely. But I learned to draw as a result of that. And comic books were a fusion of both writing and drawing, the same way children's books are. Children's books are. Um, and so sort of fell into comics. I think my first comic book it's ironic. I've always had a connection to a company that was based in Derby, Connecticut called Charlton Comics.
Mhm.
Um, I think the first comic book I ever bought was a Charlton comic. It was an Abbott and Costello comic book, um, and just like the way that the words came together. It was a cartoon on paper for all intents and purposes, and I thought it was a really cool idea. And then I started to do more and more of that, and kind of sort of got away from the children's books idea. Um, One day I'll do it, but God knows when that's going to happen. It's been 40 years and still haven't gotten to it yet. So, but
That's
yeah, so that I started with that, and then when I was in high school, I met up with two gentlemen that one worked on Justice League of America. His name was Frank McLaughlin, and another gentleman, Dick Giordano, who did pretty much inked just for everybody in the industry at that point. Um, and so they were looking for apprentices to work in their studio. Didn't pay very well to start because we're learning the ropes, but it was a great education. So
Mhm.
I mean if I had to pay for what I learned in that time frame, it would have been a lot more than what they could have paid me.
Right.
At the
Yeah.
end of the day. So it was a great experience. I learned everything from the ground up. From doing paste ups, which is what you used to do back in the day before everything that's scanned into Photoshop.
Mhm.
You had to take rubber cement and paste it on the back of the image and paste it down on a bigger piece of paper because everything was shot with a camera. It wasn't scanned. That wasn't a thing back then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of like getting into DJing. Everybody started with 45s, and
Right.
now it's all digital.
Mhm.
So, but that's good because it's also the equivalent of if you learn how to drive a car, if you learn standard, you can drive anything.
Mhm.
So I learned from that point, and then as new technology came along, you learn a new technology, and so I'm always learning something.
Yeah.
Um, but back then that was like the big basis of it was not only do I learn how to take this craft and turn it into something, but now the next step is how to get paid to do it.
Right.
Um, and these are things they don't necessarily teach you in college.
Mhm.
They teach you how to draw, they teach you how to do layout and design, but when it comes to getting the job, you're kind of on your own.
Exactly.
you know,
Sounds
so
like
here I,
a fantastic experience to be able to get that hands-on experience to learn
mhm,
all of that. Now, you were
exactly.
published at 15. What was that
Yes.
experience like?
Well, working in a studio, and Charlton had made an announcement that they were accepting new talent for a project they were doing called Charlton Bullseye.
Mhm.
And so they were looking for submissions. The pay wasn't great, but it didn't matter because he got published.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I'll dip my hand in it. I drew a one-page story. It was, I mean, if I look at it now, I kind of cringe, but back then I was like, this is it.
Mhm.
And some friends of mine and I had gone up to Charlton. They went up and they were looking of it as like a job interview. So they brought samples of their work, but they didn't have anything that was completed. It was just, here it shows you I can draw, shows you I can write, and that kind of thing. And they looked at everybody and they said, well, this is great stuff, but you don't have anything here we can use. And I said, well, I got a story. And I had the one-page story that I had drawn. And the guy looked at it and he said, yeah, this is exactly what we're looking for. We can use
Wow.
this. So of my four friends, I was the only one that got published that day.
Oh, wow.
You know, I mean, to be fair, later on, most of them have gone on to do things in the industry. We're ended up working for like Kamiko and
Mhm.
other stuff at Marvel, DC in the background
Mhm.
department. So they got their time, but I got mine first. Yeah.
That's really cool. So can you give us just a snapshot from that journey of being published at 15 to then now you're the editor in chief?
Well,
How
it
did
sounds like
that
it
happen?
sounds like it was a quick ride, but it
Yeah.
really wasn't. Um, I did that one piece, and then I said, okay, fine. I did a couple other pieces, but at that point, there was, they had gotten so many submissions from talent that mine was kind of in the back of the line, and by the time they got up to me, the book had been canceled. They only did 10 issues of the comic. But I felt honored to have made it in that 10 issues, within that 10 issues. Hold on a second. Hmm. So time went on, and Charlton went back to just doing preprints of earlier stuff they had done, and they were slowly phasing out as a company. And at that point, a few of my friends and I were trying to start a comic book company, and we developed these characters and these storylines and these ideas. And someone had told me that Charlton was getting ready to shut down, and I said, "Well, before they shut down, let me just go up there and pitch an idea. It's a long shot,
Yeah.
but why not?"
Right.
And the worst they can do is say no, and then we go back to doing what we were doing anyway. So I went up there, and they listened to what I had to say, and not just that I had a bunch of ideas, but I had a plan as to how I wanted to implement it. Um, the direct market was something that was a new entity at that point. Really, the direct market for comic books really only came into play in like the late 70s, early 80s. It
Mhm.
wasn't really a thing before that. Before that, everything went to newsstand, which is a different system. It's newsstand. You would print your comic books up. You would send them out to what they call uh, independent distributors, IDs. And there's a whole bunch of these people all over the country, and they're the ones that get the magazines into stores. They don't really care too much about comic books. It's sort of like if we got some room in the back of the truck, yeah, I'll throw some comics on there, and then I'll make it into the stores. The stores were never completely reliable as far as consistency with like excuse me. If you were an avid reader and you collected the comics issue by issue, you might not find each issue in the same venue because of the haphazardness of the way comics were distributed. So, we had a little network going where, my buddy would call me and was like, "Did you get X-Men this week?" No, I didn't know it came out. Yeah, we found it at the drugstore down, on so and so street, and we'd all, we find our way to get those issues. Um, Someone somewhere said this is really a pain in the butt. Why don't we set up a network? We'll go direct to the comic book publishers and say, look, we'll take orders and we'll then sell them to local retailers that specialize in comic books, so that there's a consistency in the books issue by issue. Well, Charlton was an independent distributor. The company that owned them was an independent distributor, Capital Distributing. And so they understood that end of the market. They didn't understand the direct market. And I came in and I said, this is the direct market. This is what you need to do. And they said, okay, well, you seem to know what you're doing. You know, give it a shot. And they gave me a budget, and I took off from there.
That's amazing.
And
And I love how you said like it wasn't just about having a bunch of ideas, it was having a plan,
right,
right? That's
exactly.
that's so important. I feel like sometimes, especially as artists, we have so many ideas, but no plans to execute them.
Right, right. I see that. I see it now in the comic book market. There's guys that are excited about the idea of doing their own comics. They won the lottery, or they, got a good income refund check.
Mhm.
And they figured, I got enough money, I can print my own comic book. And they sit down and they develop the artwork and they write a story, which may or may not be the best story in the world, but it satisfies the artwork that they're working on, and they get that first issue out and they put it out there, and then it's like, well, now what? Yeah,
Right. Now the real work really starts, right?
yeah,
Using marketing to reach out to people. There's just so much to do.
exactly. Plus, you just got the first issue done.
Yeah.
Let's go.
What about the
Let's go.
rest of them?
Yeah, that kind of happened with the Ninja Turtles guys, Eastman and Laird. Um, they came up with an idea for a comic book. They raised the money to do it, and they put the first issue together, printed out 3,000 copies of it. They had no idea how well it was going to sell, and they like, well, like you said, how do we market it now? They
Hmm.
didn't know how to go to a distributor. They didn't know anything. They put an ad, and there was a newspaper magazine called Comic Buyer's Guide. It doesn't exist anymore, but they put an ad in that saying, "Hey, we got this new comic, and it only costs you this much money. Order it from us directly." And they sold out.
Wow.
And they went back to press and they printed another 2 or 3 thousand copies, and that sold out. And they said, "Hey, we got something here."
Yeah.
So eventually, one of the main distributors contacted them and said, "Why aren't you calling us to distribute your comic book? You
Right.
probably could have sold 100,000 copies if you had come to us directly, instead of trying to just sell it by yourself on in an ad a news magazine."
Mhm.
And they did that. They started to do that, and Ninja Turtles started to blow up amongst fans. And then they were approached by a company that wanted to make toys, and the toy company was willing to finance an animated cartoon. And
Yeah.
then that got more people involved in it that never heard of this comic book. um, and it became a phenomenon.
Wow.
So, but it was all step by step.
Yeah. That's a really cool story. I never knew that about that comic.
Hmm. I had talked to Kevin Eastman. Was the primary artist of the series, and I said to them, "I was like, where did you guys get the idea to do this?" He goes, "Well, we wanted to do the comic book. Well, as far as everything else, we were flying by the seat of our pants."
Right.
And I was like, "Great." I was supposed to do an illustration that was going to go in the fourth issue of the
Oh,
original
wow.
comic book. The only problem was I had just gotten the Charlton deal, and I was
Oh,
swamped. So I think I still have the artwork around here somewhere. Um, but so I had to back out. I had to back out of it, which is
wow.
because that would have been a nice story
A
to tell
nice
too.
right now, yeah, to say
Hmm.
that. I mean, you've worn so many hats in comics as a writer, an artist, an editor. Which role comes the most natural to you, and which one challenges you the most?
Hmm. It all challenges me, um, because each thing has its own criteria, if that makes any sense. Like, I mean, I spent a number of years just lettering comic books for other people and other publishers, where that was it. I didn't ink anybody. I didn't draw anything. I didn't write anything, um, and that was its own experience. But now everything's digital, so I don't have to letter anymore by hand. It's all done on the computer. So there's a challenge to everything you do, because the industry changes so much. I
Right.
mean, I see AI filtering into things now, which is kind of scaring me. But and that's another good example, because technology is always going to try to catch up and exceed you.
Mhm.
And the thing is that we need to learn how to tame technology and not rely on it. Like GPS. I've seen people get in a car and turn their GPS on, and then they get lost because the GPS takes them somewhere other than
They're
where they need to
completely
go.
different. Yeah. Like some
Mhm.
back alley somewhere. Like, why?
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's my big fear about AI is exactly that. People are gonna get into it and they're gonna get lazy and lackadaisical, and they're not gonna the creative side of it is gonna go away,
Mhm.
for people that rely on that. Or there'll be people that think they can rely on that without having any creative talent, and you're gonna end up with really stiff, dead product that's gonna kill the industry.
Mhm. Yeah, really like generic stories, right? Because it's just regurgitating,
Right.
you know,
It
how it's been trained. I mean,
my
it's a wonderful tool in some ways. I feel like if you're just brainstorming, for example, I don't know, give
Mhm,
a list of words, different than whatever this word, different than slimy or something. And I suppose you could look at a thesaurus, but sometimes like things like that I think are helpful, but to just
mhm,
rely on it, I'm right there with you. You can't rely on it to just write your story, or
right.
to come up with these ideas. Like you have to have that creative well within yourself.
Mhm. What I find with the AI writing, because I talked to somebody, I said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to write a book and I can use AI." I'm like, it's overwritten. If
Mm-hmm.
that makes any sense,
Yeah.
like it's like when you're in junior high school and you have to write 900 words on something and you're like, oh, I don't know. It was a very 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 long day.
Right,
um,
exactly.
that type of thing. It doesn't do that, but it will
Yeah.
it'll regurgitate the same line over and over again,
Right.
to kind of fill the space.
There's no heart. Like there's no heart behind it. It's
Right.
just, yeah.
Exactly. So, that's the thing. And artistically, yeah, I've seen those images where someone's got six fingers, and it's like weird stuff. Or even if it doesn't have that, the characters look like they're on something, like they're medicated in a scene where it's like, I killed your brother. Oh, you killed my brother? That's like, no, 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 no.
Right,
There's
right.
there's no emotion there. That means that you're right. There's no heart in what comes out of it. I
Exactly.
mean, 10 years from now it might be different, but mm,
Yeah.
not yet.
And I feel like there's such a magic that happens between an artist and a writer, right?
Yeah,
When you're working together and however that jive is, if whether it's the art that comes first or the writing that comes first, like you're just not going to get that with AI. It's just not
right. Well, that's the thing. The best comic books were created by two guys, and in a
Mhm.
lot of cases didn't care. They didn't, like they after the fact you go, oh, they were a wonderful team and they worked together well. During the process, though, it was like, get out of my face. I can't stand you. I want this to look like this, and you want it to look like that. But then eventually they kind of come together, and compromise, and that's how you get these dynamic characters. Because if it's only up to one person, it might work, but it might not. But you got two people that are kind of arguing with each other and battling it, fighting it out, they're going to come up with something that's got more passion in it. You
Right,
know,
exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up. What's something that you wish more people understood about the writing side of comics in that whole process?
about the writing side of comics,
And the art.
that it's not just sit down with a pad of paper and just
Mhm.
put it out there. You have to think about the characters. What do they think? How do they feel? Um, and I just did. I submitted a story for that's going to be published, hopefully in the next couple of months. It's a superhero anthology prose book, and I hadn't just written prose in a while. I've been just doing everything, comic book style, and so I had to really think about it. And the story that I wrote is about two superheroes. They don't know that each or the other is a superhero, and they're going on a blind date.
Oh, I love it.
You know, and so in order to do that, I had to really think about the characters. How do they think? do they have anything in common?
Mhm.
And and if so, how do I interact that in the course of telling the story? You know, because some things and some elements happen, and by the end of the story, neither really knows the other's a hero. They kind of suspect it, but they don't know for sure. Um, but you get to see how each of them acts in the heroic situation.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had to think about all that. What's the mentality? One's a female, and why would she become a superhero? I'd never gotten to their origin stories because it wasn't important. The
Right.
most important was about the fact that that they're living a life that the ability to have superpowers is just coincidental,
Mhm.
more or less, as far as the story is concerned. I mean, it's certainly the heroic abilities do serve the story. Don't get me wrong, but
Right.
it's really more about the characters themselves and how they feel in this world, and connect with other people.
Mhm.
You know, we have to think about all of that stuff, and I make notes upon notes upon notes
Mhm.
of things that I might have a sequence in my head, and then I don't know where it's going to go
Mhm.
or what I'm going to do with it. And then later on, as I'm writing a story, it's like a puzzle piece. It fits right in. I go, boom, okay, that's where it goes. And now I know why this character does what they do. And I might have to go back and do some rewriting, but I know, where what the character's aiming for, and those little bits help make the character more human as
Mhm.
you're writing. And you're right, the AI can't do that.
Exactly. No, it cannot do that. Where do you usually get your ideas from? Do they just come to you? Do certain things inspire you? Certain activities help?
That's like the eternal question.
Yeah.
I get them from everywhere. I might, be sitting in a diner and, see a mother interact with a son.
Mhm.
And, something about that inspires me to come up with a story. Um, Stuff like that. Sometimes, watching a TV program or reading something that happens in the news. Um, there was well, case in point, there was a mall I used to go to constantly. I lived in Waterbury, and I lived down the street from this mall, so I would be there every day. Um, Yesterday, apparently, there was the shots rang out and people were injured. Nobody died, which is good. Um, but it gave me an idea for a story.
Right.
What happened there and why did it happen?
Mhm.
Um, and I'm gonna sit down and make notes about it, and eventually it'll become a story at some point.
Yeah. It's really for me, I agree. I'm the same way. It's really how I make sense of the world. And so, I'm constantly like, I carry a notebook with me and I write down everything. Like something will just catch my eye, or like you said, you hear about it on the news, you write it down.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're like half-formed thoughts. And
Yep,
sometimes like it could be years before you know what you're going to do with it. And you look back through the notebook and like, oh, I had this idea a long time ago, could go with this idea, I thought of yesterday and kind of put it together in some way.
exactly. I don't bring the note. I used to bring the notebook, and I
Mhm.
would have notes upon notes upon notes. People look at me and think as if I'm insane because it's like I grab a scrap piece of paper and I write something on it, and they're like, what is that for? And I was like, don't worry about it.
Mhm.
But now I have my iPhone, and there's an app called Notepad, and I write everything on that, and so no one, I don't look like an insane person because to them I'm just texting somebody as far as they know. Um,
Right.
but
I
I've
still
got.
look insane. I have like a journal. I flip it out. Start right.
Mhm,
So I do use my phone sometimes. It
yeah.
depends.
So, and in fact, I've got a storyline. I got a comic that I'm working on.
Mhm.
Um, I've been plotting out 50 issues of this story. I'm not going to draw it. Oh, that's the plan anyway. I'm going to give it to other artists to draw, but I'm going to be doing exclusively just the writing and the plotting of it. And the comic is called Secret Psychos,
Oh,
and the
wow.
whole premise of it is, what would you do if you had superpowers for one day?
Mhm.
What power would you want? 'Cause you only get one.
Mhm.
What power would you want, and what would you do with it? And the story follows 50 different people that have different ideas of what they would do with having superpower. And the stories are basically about the follow through. They get the abilities from a company that specializes in giving people superpowers for one day. Um, there's a subplot that goes to the story because there's a reason this company's doing this that you
Mhm.
don't quite know right away.
Of course.
Um, the other thing is that if you're going to be a company now, commerce is everything.
Mhm.
If you're going to give someone superpowers, why wouldn't you give them something that's a little bit more durable than just one day?
Right.
Um, there's a reason for that, and all these things come across through the telling of the larger
Mhm.
arc of the story. But each issue really follows these individuals as they get these abilities. One person wants to have powers to impress his girlfriend.
Mhm.
Another person um, wants to help children. Another person wants to catch her boyfriend
Mhm.
cheating on her. And so the powers they get play into that. Um, so that and so the moment I come up with an ability that I like to use, I come up with an idea that facilitates that ability. What's the story? What makes this power interesting, and what would happen if they realized they couldn't keep that power at the end of 24 hours.
Right.
Um, that type of thing. So I probably got the idea. There was a show that used to come on. It didn't even last a season. It's called Millionaire.
Mhm.
And no, sorry, not Millionaire. There's another show, Lottery.
Okay.
And the story followed people that would win the lottery. And the stories, like these two guys were the constants of the show. They were the guys that brought the check.
Mhm.
And they would go, give this lottery check to somebody, and the story of the episode would be what that person did with with their lottery winnings, whether they used it to show off, and did they end up with anything left over after by
Right.
the end of the episode, that all these little things. And I thought that was an interesting idea, and I didn't think about it for years, and I think that might be, as I thought about it while as I was coming up with Secret Psychos, I
Mhm.
thought, well, maybe that's where I got the base idea from, was that what happens next.
Right. Exactly. It's such a great concept. Like there's such an opportunity for storytelling there.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. So when do you think this will be coming out?
Every time I think I'm about ready to do it, something new happens. So
Oh no.
um, I came up with an idea for a super speedster character, a female. And Bob stepped in and said, "Hey, that sounds like a cool idea. I'd like to write that." And I was like, "Okay, great." So that's now taken precedence, and so Zephyr will be the next project that comes out. The
Okay.
character's name is Zephyr, and probably after that.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for both of them, but I'm really excited about Secret Psychos. I love the title too. It's so cool.
Mm,
Such a great concept. I just think because like so many people could relate to that because you're always thinking, about, oh, if I only could do this,
yep.
and how would I change the world? And there's just so many powers that would be awesome to have. I don't know if I could even pick one, to be honest.
Every time I mention it to somebody gives me like two or three power abilities I would have never thought of before, and I go, "Hey, Um, Mike DiCarlo, who's another artist, he actually worked for years at actually he's worked for a number of publishers. Um, but we were used to work in studio back in the days when I was 15, 16. Um, and he just randomly said, "Oh, if I had these powers, I'd do this, this, and this." And I'm like, I didn't think of those. And I came up with stories that fit those things. So those issues will hit somewhere and say special thanks to Mike DiCarlo at the bottom,
I
because
love
it's just but that's that that's basically that. But and I get it all the time. People go, "Oh, if I had, I'd do this." And I'm like, "Don't talk to me about it, because I only have 50 issues to tell the story." So
it. Too many powers. What's
mhm.
one mistake you often see new creators make, and how can they avoid it?
Haste makes waste. They come up with the idea that I want to do this, and
Mhm.
they rush to do it. They rush to get it out. And the one of the most important things my dad ever said to me was, You need to learn how to crawl before you can walk. You need to learn how to walk before you can run. And I see too many these new young creators out there rushing to get a comic book out, and then they're disillusioned by the way the marketplace works because they think, "Oh, I'll put it out there, and then suddenly I'll get a toy, and I'll get a movie, and I'm going to make
Right.
millions of dollars." And it's like that's not how it works. You
Mhm.
need to understand the mechanics of how this works before you can get to that. I've got one of the first projects that we published. I don't own it, but the character is called the Philistine, and Philistine has been bopping around Hollywood now for about 15 years. Every time a hit movie comes out that has something to do with superheroes, they race to the guy that created it to try to option the rights to the movie. And it's still floating around Hollywood. It's just the way it is. If it gets made, lovely. Everybody's happy, but nobody's basically holding their breath waiting for it. You
Right.
know,
Exactly. And even sometimes like you can, as the writer, right, get, optioned or paid for that opportunity. Like they're going to make the movie and then it never makes it, you know?
right?
So you
I
never know. It's such a long haul to actually get there and to see your work become something
Yeah.
on screen.
The the agent that we spoke to about it said, until you see it in the theater for yourself,
Exactly. Yes.
don't get excited.
You could even make the movie, right? And say,
Yeah.
okay, no, we're not releasing it. I mean, you
Well,
just
that happened. The Let me think here. Well, a couple times there was a comic book called Mouse Guard, and it
Mhm.
was one of those. The guy had a cute idea for a comic with these mice that kind of lived in this feudal situation, and the comic did sold gangbusters in the 80s. And he got Hollywood to come knocking at his door, and they wanted to option it to make a movie. Finally got a name producer involved. It was they were going to CGI it, and it was I saw samples of the. If you go on the YouTube, there are little test samples of the animation for it, so it was pretty close to becoming a thing. And then it got to, it was going to be picked up by 20th Century Fox, and then 20th Century Fox got bought by Marvel or by Disney. I'm sorry.
right, right.
And they gutted a lot of those projects that were in the pipeline, and
Yeah.
that was one of them.
Oh,
Yeah, and I would have loved to have seen it because if seriously, you can get a chance, look it up. It's called Mouse Guard.
mouse guard.
Um, there's like maybe 2 or 3 minutes of test footage, and
Mhm.
it's amazing, absolutely amazing. It would have been a cult, classic easily.
Wow.
But
That's
yeah,
Hollywood. That's what happens.
yep. Another one was Bone.
Mhm.
Bone was going to be made into an animated series, and Netflix was supposed to pick it up. And then COVID hit, and everybody started shutting down animation studios and such, and Bone kind of went the way of the dodo. I
Yeah.
think he's still hoping he can get it done as a project, but he's had that particular project has been going to film studios over and over and over again, and nothing having come of it.
Right.
Um, excuse me. And I still have hope for it because again, these are great projects that if they actually can just get out there,
Mhm.
they're gonna be huge.
Exactly. Speaking of this, of projects that, are almost get there, but not quite, what advice do you give to an artist or a writer that's facing rejection or any kind of a setback? Like, what's your advice to help them keep going?
No is not an option. That's really it. Who was I talking to? I think it was Todd McFarlane. Um, and he said when he first submitted his artwork to the companies, they rejected him, and it was no thank you, thanks, no thanks, thanks, no thanks, thanks, no thanks, and but he kept going, and he just said, you know what, I'm just going to keep collecting rejection letters
Yes.
because eventually the odds are somebody's going to finally say yes.
Mhm.
And Marvel said yes, and he started working on a bunch of titles for them. I think he started on Incredible Hulk, and it became a banger. It sold very well. He ended up on Spider-Man. He created Venom, which is like
Wow.
a
Yeah.
huge character now. And now he has his own character named Spawn. He's publishing his own stuff through Image. He's one of the Image founders. Um, but had he just said, well, 13 companies said no, and maybe I should go work at McDonald's or something like that. We would have never seen that. But no, it's not an option. If you believe in the project you're working on, you know, fine tune it. Keep working on it and make it better. If it's not good enough, if they don't like it now, they'll like it eventually. I mean, Marvel told Jim Lee no. Jim Lee now is one of the president publisher of DC Comics. Um, but
Yeah.
back in the day, he got rejection letters up the wazoo. When he finally got in, he's one of the top artists in the industry now. So,
Exactly. A lot of times it's the person still standing, that just never gave up and just kept,
mhm, exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
And it's hard, because it takes an emotional toll, I think, on whether you're a writer or an artist, because you're putting so much of yourself into it. And it's almost like a rejection of you in some
Mhm.
way. Um, but I agree 100%. Like you have to just keep going. I mean, just look at the record of how many successful people, I think was it Stephen King who like wallpapered his room with rejection letters?
Probably. I know his first novel, and this is now everywhere online. He started writing the story. At this point he become a high school teacher of English, and but he would in between times he was doing that, and he was doing laundry at night, like working at a laundry. Um, Somewhere in between that, he would continue to write, and he's writing a story about this girl with psychic abilities, and he just finally got frustrated and crumbled it up and threw it away. And his wife basically reached out into the waste paper basket and read it and said, "You have something here. Keep going.
Yeah.
Don't stop."
Mhm.
And that became Carrie.
Right.
And Carrie blew up into his career. You know,
Yes.
I've seen his house too. He went from living out of in a trailer
Right.
with four kids, or three kids, four kids, three kids, and what do you call it? To this house, which is this huge Victorian. Um, it's got like a wrought iron fence in the front with bat wings on the top,
Yeah.
uh, and it's
Cool.
a really cool place. It's up in Bangor, Maine. I had to go up there for an event at one of the colleges up there, and we stopped to get gas, and just out of curiosity, I happened to ask the guy at the counter. I was like, "Do you happen to know where Stephen King lives?" Everybody in the place
Of
was
course.
like, "Oh yeah, Stephen King, yeah, dude, I'm going right past it right now. If you want to follow me, I'll show you." So
Right.
I've been past this house a few times up in Bangor. Um, but the one thing that they said was, if the gates are open, he's not home. If the gates are closed, he's home. Um, and he would do things like on Halloween, he'd rent a limousine and he'd get the neighborhood kids and they go take a trick or treating in the limousine around
Oh,
the
wow.
neighborhood.
That's cool.
And that's something that I'm sure that hey, he's got a bunch of money, why not?
Right. Exactly. And
So
imagine if he had, if his wife hadn't pulled it out of the garbage, it's just
exactly,
it's such a testament how, we need people to believe in us too, as
yeah.
well.
hmm She writes as well, Tabitha, and now his kids are writing. I think the only one that doesn't, I think his younger son doesn't write that I know of, but they've all been published now. In fact, if you've heard of the author named Joe Hill is actually Stephen King's oldest son.
Oh,
He
wow.
just doesn't go by the name King because he wanted to kind of build his own road in the industry. But Hill was his mother's maiden name, so he went with Joe Hill.
Tell us about United Comics. How did it start and what do you publish?
It started because I got tired of being used.
Yeah.
That truly, this is the story. I had left Charlton. for a lot of reasons that I won't get into. And that's when I started doing, work for other publishers, and mostly lettering, some coloring, some, design work. And I had a guy that came up to me and he's like, hey, you do comics. Yeah. Well, I got this great idea for a comic. Everybody will come up to you and tell
Mhm.
you about this great idea they have for a comic book. And if you help them work on it, they'll split the proceeds with you. Um, and that would never really happen. It happened a few times. You haven't signed contracts, it still happened. Um, and the thing that finally burned to me was a book that this kid had come up with the idea. He did all the artwork. I wasn't doing that. I basically just helped him put it together, edited it for him, did the lettering for him. Um, helped hooked him up with the distributors, and all that. And the local newspaper did an article on this kid and his new comic, and they love to interview you about your projects. The first question they'll almost always ask you is, "And you did this all by yourself?" And the kid's answer was, "Yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah.
I came up with everything. I did design work. And I said, "Oh, you did, huh? That's cool." He only did the one issue because when he came back to me to talk to me about the second issue, I'm like, not interested.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm like, I would rather publish others
Mhm.
because then I'm in control of all that, and the money comes in. It comes in here to this office, and then I divvy it to other people. Versus me hoping that someone's going to do the right thing
Right,
and not
exactly.
have it happen. You
Mhm.
know, I mean, it didn't take me long to figure it out. This was all over like a 2 year period, but there were a few different instances where it happened. Um, One gentleman literally stole the artwork. I did the work for him, and when it came time to pay me, he's like, "Well, I just need to review it. Can I just borrow the artwork, just take a look at it, and I'll make some notes and to make things fix." No, he took it, he printed it, never put my name on it.
Oh,
I sued him for it.
yeah.
I won in court,
Mhm.
and then I got a letter a week later from the court telling me I lost the case. And I said, "How did I lose the case?"
How does that happen?
Exactly. Well, what I came to find out was the magistrate, because it wasn't a judge. I don't know how the small claims court system works, but occasionally they'll have someone who's basically a lawyer who's acting as a judge. They call him a magistrate, and apparently this person had connections with his family. So he sided with me, and
Mhm.
then I guess they gave him crap about it, and he re-judged, re-adjudicated the case, and I lost. And I said that's BS.
Yeah.
So that's when I said, what, I'm doing it for myself.
Mhm.
And United Comics was born. It's United in that I'm still taking and working with other people, but I'm the guy in charge. I'm not relying on anybody else to do that.
Exactly. And that's such a great feeling to be in charge of the work that you're producing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really love about being an indie author is, I love being able to be in control of that process. It's a lot of work, but
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
a tremendous amount of work, but you can build a team, right? That
Yeah,
work with you and, and
exactly.
people that you can trust.
That's and it's an ongoing thing. You get people that jump into it because they think it's very easy to do, and they don't do much of anything. And it's like, well, this is a job, just like every other job.
Right.
You can't just jump in and expect to be this big marquee name. I've been in the industry for 40 years. I'm not a marquee name. If you walk outside and you say TC4, they go, who? And that's fine. That's you know that humanizes you.
Yeah,
If nothing else. But
exactly.
but I have nothing to prove. I produce what I produce. People like it, they buy it, and they're happy. And every once in a while, somebody comes and sniffs around and says, "Hey, that'd make a great cartoon, or that'd make a great comic, movie." I'm not ready for that yet, and I keep telling them, "Let me get the comics out first. Let me have a body of work that I'm happy enough to say, okay, now let's start pitching to Hollywood." You
Right.
know, but I'm not doing this to get a Hollywood deal.
Right, exactly. You're doing it because you love to do it. It's your passion.
Yeah,
That's what has to come
I
first.
have something to say, and I say
Exactly.
it through comics.
Exactly. What kind of comics do you publish through United Comics? Like, what are your most recent ones?
Well, like Charlton, it's a variety of things.
Mhm.
Um, Comic books used to be very diverse in that you could get, one publisher would have, you know, 8 or 9 or 10 different genres in one publishing house. So you could have a licensed title like a Thundercats or whatever. You could have comics that are based on like I Love Lucy or Gomer Pyle or something like that. Um, Stand-up comedian could have his own comic book. You could have westerns, you could have horror books, you could have war comics, and nowadays it's mostly seems to be mostly superheroes. So the other genres still exist in comics, but they're kind of few and far between.
Mhm.
They're not as the comics aren't as diverse as they used to be. Um, and I think that that's something that can kill the marketplace if you only put your eggs in one basket.
Right.
Um, so, the books that we're doing, I'm developing superhero titles, and we will have some. But right now, my focus is mostly on humor titles, like the Cartoon Brew that Elgin did, that you have.
Yes, I love
Is
that. It was so good.
Alien Summer. He just did a little animated piece online, which was kind of cool, based on a caricature he had drawn of a woman in a coffee shop. And I said, okay. So I used it to promote we have a line of coffee. I use it to promote the coffee line. Um, but Alien Summer is another one that's it's humorous. It reminds me of the old Harvey comics, which is what drew me to it to want to publish it. He's working on a third issue now that's going to be in 3D with the 3D glasses.
Yes. Oh, cool.
So, I like that. It's different from a lot of the stuff that's out there now. Is either superheroes or it's just really dark, gloomy,
Right.
dystopian universe kind of stuff. I have those stories too. They're
Mhm.
in there, but you know, everybody's doing those stories. So my whole thing is that if you're in a situation where you're fighting to go uphill, maybe you need to learn to pivot.
Right.
And humor sells. It really does. um I have a sci-fi book called Shockwave, and it's all sci-fi little short stories, like the books I used to be able to read through DC. DC used to have like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and so I like those kinds of stories. And so I'm developing books that are more like those types of comics, little short stories, 8 to 10, 12 pages long, um, so that you feel like you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. It's not just this 100 issue saga that you'll probably never see,
Right.
because most people, get hung up on the first 2 or 3 issues, and then you never see any more issues of it. So then you feel like you wasted your time, or you invested your time in a story that's never going to go anywhere.
Mhm.
The shorter stories, they're one and done. You're in, like if you're watching a half hour comedy show, you can watch it that half hour, you can enjoy it, it's done. Now the characters come back next week, but it's a whole different scenario.
Whole new, yeah, it's a whole new scenario, like Seinfeld.
The
It's a
exact
whole new show.
exactly.
Mhm.
And comics used to be like that. Comics need to go back to that. I
Right.
mean, I'm not saying that you should never do a serial story in a comic book, but not every comic book needs to be a serial story.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the best and the worst thing Marvel did for them was to connect all the characters. It's all connected. That was their big thing, and it works with them with the movies. But it's also the thing that's killing the movies,
Right.
because everybody watches the movie and go, well, how does this fit in with Spider-Man? And how does this fit in with Iron Man? How does this fit in with, instead of just enjoying the story for what it is.
Exactly. You're so busy worried about the whole universe, you can't just focus on that one story in front of you. Of
Exactly. I mean, it works for Marvel to the degree that it works for Marvel, but they're also not seeing the big returns that they were before Endgame. I
Mhm.
think Endgame was like the culmination of it all. And what do you do now? Well, you really can't do Endgame again because you already did it.
Right.
So where are you headed now? So they said, well, we're going to introduce new characters, but that was the problem. People said, I've never heard of this character before, and I don't see how it's connected to Doctor Strange or whatever. So I'm not going to watch it.
Right.
And so now they're trying to connect those characters together, and it's a whole. It's not. It's kind of working, but
Mhm.
not really. Like the new movie that came out, Thunderbolts, that just came out, introduced characters that you only saw if you watched the Disney, the Marvel shows on Disney TV or
Mhm.
Disney Plus. And if you didn't watch Disney Plus, you
You
don't know
didn't
who these
know.
characters are.
You didn't know what was going on. Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think it killed the box office for Captain America: New World Order, nah, New World Order, because the character. I mean, if this is the Captain America that used to be the Falcon. And so if you followed the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was on Disney Plus, you could watch this movie and you got a lot more out of it. If you
Right.
never watched the Falcon and Winter Soldier, you're like, who's this guy and why is he doing this and what's going on here? And how did that guy get into that costume and become
Yeah.
Captain America?
Right.
You know, and it's like you gotta watch the movie, you gotta watch the TV shows too.
Mhm.
Not everybody does that. So, but they
What's
rely.
your favorite
I'm sorry.
genre? What's your favorite genre of comics? So you love humor. Would that be your favorite of the comics, or what would you
Um,
be the most
right,
that is?
right now, um, yeah, right now humor. I have another horror comic idea. That's again a bunch of short stories, but again, there's a larger story that's going on. There's a woman that's been, um, she's been, she was in the military. She was caught by the other side, and she's been a prisoner of war for this whole time frame. And every so often they threaten to kill her. But she comes up with these stories and she starts to tell them, and it's kind of like the Scheherazade
Mhm.
type thing. So they never kill her because they're fascinated by her stories, and the stories get darker and darker and darker the longer she's there. Um, and so that's what I'm working on now, as well. I've got a bunch of different things I'm working on. I always just tell people, yeah, it's in the pipeline. It's in the pipeline.
Clients there.
Mm-hmm. So
What?
the problem is that I don't have enough stories to really make it front and center. So if I get more stories along the lines of what I want to publish, I can put them in that book, and then that book will come bump up the list a little bit sooner. But
It's
yeah.
it's really the hardest decision I feel like a writer has to make is what story to tell. When you have all these ideas, right? Like how do you
Hmm.
what story you're going to focus on?
I don't know. It just I wake up one day and I go, okay, this story is front and center in my head, and I
Mhm.
need to get it out. And so I'll work on that story, and then I'll put it to the side. And if it's still resonating with me 2 days later, 3 days later, then I'll keep going with it. Otherwise, I'll move on to something else.
Mhm.
Um, so that's pretty much it. It's um, I will at some point sit down and say, okay, what do I have as an inventory of stories, and what can I do with them to make sure that they come out before the end of my life. Yeah.
That actually brings me to my next question. So what's the legacy that you hope to leave behind? Like not just in comments, but in how you inspire other creators.
If I can, I mean, these all the comics I publish, whether I drew them or I didn't draw them, I just wrote them or I lettered them or whatever. Those are my children. I don't have any kids,
Mhm.
so these are my children. So if these things are more than just collected, if people sat down and they read them, and something in the story I wrote or a piece of artwork that I did resonates with somebody enough that they want to pick up the mantle and keep going, that's the legacy I want. You
Yeah.
know, and I see it. I have it all the time. I mean, I'm a huge Rod Serling fan,
Mhm.
and in fact, right now I'm revisiting all the old Twilight Zone
Oh
episodes.
yeah, they're the best. I
Um,
love Twilight Zone.
mhm. And so I at one point I wanted to publish it, but
Yeah.
another publishing house got their hands on it. So I said, okay, fine, I'm not going to be able to do that one. And there was another series called Tales from the Dark Side that was inspired by George Romero's stuff, and almost had the rights to that too. I literally had meetings with these guys,
Mhm.
but the financing was the thing that prevented that from happening. Um, but yeah, I mean, but those are people that inspired me to do what I do. Overall, there's some brilliant creators out there. Some of whom I've gotten to know. I wish I had gotten to meet Ray Bradbury because he's also an inspiration.
Amazing.
Um, I mean, and he had the best mindset about writing.
Mhm.
He would write the stories that came to him and put them out there. And he didn't worry about movies or TV shows or any of that stuff. And he had no problem with optioning his material for movies and things. And they weren't always based on the book. Because Hollywood likes to put their stink on things,
Right, yes.
so they'll change things around. And a reporter had come to him to interview him about books, and he said, you know, how do you feel about Hollywood taking your material and just destroying it, like just mangling it? That they ruined your books. And he goes, no, my books aren't ruined. They're still right there on the shelf, right there.
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know. So he didn't take the movies are the movies, and if
Mhm.
someone enjoyed something that was based on something you wrote, lovely. But if they want to read the source material, it's still there. You
Right.
know, So that's the thing. My fear is that comic books will become a tchotchke for collectability and not something that you pick up and read. And I get that all the time. Um, I have people that will come to me, approach me, and say, "Oh, I got a great idea for a children's book. I got a great idea for a novel." And I say, and they'll give me a little rough idea, and I go, "That would make a great book. I'd love to publish that." And they go, "Well, how would you do that?" And I go, well, "What do you mean?" "Well, you just do comic books."
Oh,
And I'm like,
yeah.
"Comic books
Our
and books are
story.
the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same mechanism. We use the same printers. We distribute the same way. And the difference is that one's illustrated and is for often a teen to young adult audience,
Mhm.
and a book may or may not. you
Right.
know, but it's the same mechanism. I still have to go to the same book fairs, still have to go to the same, but they don't understand that because they just go, oh, you draw a comic book and you put it on a newsstand and people who buy it and they don't buy it. Do your books end up in on Amazon or Barnes and Noble? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
the Philistine's still available on Amazon.
Mhm.
It's the only book we've put up on Amazon because I would rather do trade paperbacks than try to sell comic books through them as a what they call floppy. Um, I'd rather have something with a little more meat to it. So as we do more trade paperbacks, we'll be putting them up there. And Body and Soul, the one I'm working on now, the cover for that I was telling you about earlier, that's a trade paperback. So that's something that will immediately go to Amazon.
Mhm. Do you believe that comics have the power to change lives or change the world? And if so, how?
Oh, absolutely. Um, Many different ways. The story can be allegorical and can get people to think about their own lives and their own situations. But above and beyond all that, I can't tell you the amount of people that I know that have come up to me and they said, "Oh yeah, I used to read comics when I was a kid. That's how I learned to read."
Right. Yeah.
And comic books are reader breeders. That's what we used to say.
Yeah.
And so if that changes anyone's life. I have uh I'm partially handicapped. Well, you know that. Um, and I have an aide, and one of the first aides I had, he was great, but when it came to me saying, "Hey, read this thing for me to help me fill it out," he couldn't do it because he didn't know how to read.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, I mean, he was functionally illiterate in that, he was very adept at finding other people to read for him and
Mhm.
not letting them know that he just couldn't read in general.
Right.
Um, like, oh, I'm really busy. Can you just look at this for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
You've learned how to
Um,
survive.
and so I started showing him the comics, and he gained an interest in it. I don't know where he's at now.
Mhm.
He's moved on from working with me, but um, but maybe he may use that as a way to begin to pursue to learn how to read.
Right.
It fascinated me that as an adult he did not know how to read.
Yeah.
But there's people out there like that.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So
Is there ever been like a comic that helped you through a rough time in life or a story that
hmm,
that you felt really like inspired you or got you through something?
that's a good question. I don't know. um, Maybe when you're young and you want to start dating and you're not quite sure how that's supposed to work out, now you can go to the comic book rack and there's Archie Comics, and Archie is really all about relationships for all intents and purposes.
Mhm.
Wacky adventures and relationships, but that's basically what it is. So you're reading this and you see how he gets through a situation,
Mhm.
um, and you're thinking, okay, that might be something I can apply to real life.
Right.
Um, and because it was never that extreme that it wouldn't work for you or not work for but it gives you a template to work from.
Mhm.
So maybe that, you know, um, I'm sure there's other things. I just
Yeah.
not coming to mind.
If you could grab a coffee with any comic character, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Hmm. These are great questions. I have to say, um, you know, hmm,
There's so many choices. It's hard.
very, 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 very true. Probably Batman.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, what drives you? I mean, your parents died like 70 yeys ago. you know,
Right.
what
Yeah.
what really drives you to continue to do what you do?
Mhm.
Is it constantly that's your true heart and soul? Or, what is it that really motivates you?
Mhm.
Because I think that would be really significant to know that.
It would, right? Might even change the story. Who knows? Depending on
Mm.
what,
Oh, I think I lost you. Oh, there you go.
are we still there?
Yeah.
What's
Yep.
next for you and United Comics? Do you have any upcoming titles or projects that fans should keep an eye out for?
Well, Zephyr's. Well, okay. Next is Body and Soul. Body and Soul is based on a black and white silent film. It was written and directed by one of the first black directors in Hollywood. We're talking about turn of the century, 1900s, and it was a cult classic then. It's been remade several times over the years, but the original source movie is now public domain. And so the creator of the project came to me and said, "I want to do this. I really love this movie, and it's public domain. I'd love to do it as a comic book." And I thought it was a great idea because, well, for many reasons, I thought it was a great idea. One is it allows us to adapt something that's been out in the zeitgeist for many, many, many years, but also to show people that comic books aren't just pal bam zap.
Mhm.
This is a story about it's a story about people and their how they connect with each other in society. One guy kind of rolls on the wrong side of the law, um, but he's learning something about life as he goes along in the story. So I think that was an important story to tell, and so we're publishing it. That'll be the next thing that comes out, and then I'm working on Zephyr. Excuse me, about a young girl. Like I said, she's 17 years old. Her grandfather was a superhero back in the 70s, and pretty much, because of that, she's inherited some abilities, and so she's now, picking up the mantle of the family superhero. Something her dad didn't do.
Oh, cool.
Um, so And so using that storyline, I can go back and tell fun superhero stories. Not every superhero book has to be dark and grim.
Right.
Um, so I've got these characters that come to attack her every episode, and they're from an organization that basically is looking to dispatch her grandfather, but they don't know where he is. He's kind of in hiding, but they know where she is, so they can kind of hopefully get to him through her, and that's what they're trying to do. So I get to create like really wacky characters
Mhm.
that go after her. Some of them are hybrids of humans and animals. Um, and that gave me the idea to do another comic book that I'm again just developing right now, called Partly People, and
Okay.
it's people that are hybrids of human and animals, and they have their own story that ties in with this story. Whether I get to tell that story, is one thing, but right now I'm focusing on Zephyr.
Mhm. Awesome. They all sound like amazing projects. I can't wait to see them all come to fruition.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that everyone gets to see them soon. That's the plan.
Exactly. Well, we're going to start wrapping up. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or say?
Um, yeah, yeah. Comics uh are having a rough time right now with distribution, especially if you're an independent publisher. A lot of us are relying on comic book conventions and things to sell our books. The stores only have a finite amount of shelf space, and they're gonna jump to Marvel and DC and the big guys first. And if there's any room in the back corner somewhere, they might throw your comics up there. A lot of them don't want to do it by the same system that they normally do, where they buy the comics at a specific discount. They want to take them on a consignment basis. That doesn't help me because I'm spending money to publish my work, and now it's sitting gathering dust in your
Right.
store, because you're probably not going to promote my book because it's a small press book, you know. Um, so we're trying to find new ways to distribute comics that are not just to the comic book shops. Back when in the '80s, when comics like really got popular, there were you could find comic books in gas stations. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
Spencer Gifts would sell them. The video game stores would sell them. And that's not so much that way anymore. So I'm trying to find a new way to get back in those venues, and not just for the big guys, but for the little guys, for the
Right.
independent publishers, because like I said, they have the hardest time to as far as getting eyes on their books. They have to make their books seem collectible because they think that's the best way to sell a book. It is right now the best way to sell the book, but I want people to read my books as well as collect them. I don't want them to just buy them because it might be worth some money in 20 years.
Exactly.
So we're working on developing a distribution network that'll facilitate that. I started with an online entity called Comics Pop Shop, and so all the United Comics you can buy all your United Comics you can get through you can get through Comics Pop Shop at I can't remember the address right now. But if you go to unitedcomicworks.com, there's links to where you can order the books. There's Comics Pop Shop, and we're talking to other publishers, small publishers, and saying, hey, come join us.
Right.
Get on the site, because that's a site that you can see. It's online, so you can see it worldwide. Although right now we're focusing on sales in the United States, but if you can only go to conventions in your area, like right now I'm limited to the East Coast for a lot of different reasons. um the What do you call it, you can get your book seen in California. People go online to Comics Pop Shop, that kind of thing, and we ship all over the country. So that's the thing that's the other thing I'm working on. That's comics related, but not comic specific.
Right. But it's important because you really need to get exposure for the story so that people can hear them, read them, enjoy them. And
Right,
really difficult, distribution when you're a small publisher, just getting it out there.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
the biggest part of it is this: comic books have a low profit margin to begin with. Um, and you take that, and you take the cost that it costs to set up at a trade show or whatever to market this stuff. Um, you really have to turn some serious numbers at the end of the day, or you won't be publishing
Yeah,
for
not for
very
very
long.
long. Some of the trade shows are very expensive to
Yeah,
do, so you
yeah,
have to sell like a lot of comics to make that price, that cost back before you even make.
exactly, exactly. Like one of the things that we also do merch, like the mugs.
Mhm.
Um, that
Yes.
we have. Um, because those have a higher profit margin, a little bit higher profit margin, and that helps us to facilitate, putting out the comics.
Right. Why do you think the distribution has changed where like it used to be in gas stations and all these different other stores and it's not anymore?
Well, a lot of it was, this is my opinion, um, comics maintained a pretty low profile until they killed off Superman.
Mm.
DC Comics came up with a brilliant idea. Let's kill Superman, and I saw this and I said, okay, this is going to be huge.
Mhm.
And I went to the local comic shops and I said, guys, order the crap out of this because it's going to be huge. And they looked at me like, I sell 25 copies of Superman. It's not going to work. I'm just going to order 25 copies of Superman. And I said, you know what? I believe in that it's going to be huge. I'll order 100 copies from you right now, pre-order.
Yeah.
And I said, that's stupid. Why would you do that? And I said, because this is what I see happening. It's like, comics are becoming a collectible item for the marketplace.
Mhm.
And this is something that's going to be huge for collectors, because, Superman dies. Now, they're not going to keep him, dead for long. And they didn't,
Right.
a year later, they brought him back. But, it still didn't matter because the marketplace is the marketplace.
Mhm.
And it came out on a slow news day. And there were lines around the block.
Wow.
I called my girlfriend and I said, "Hey, before we go out tonight, I got to stop and get my comics." And she's like, "Oh, why do you have to do it today?" I said, "Well, today's New Comic Day, and this is the issue that they kill Superman. I got to get my copies." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Yeah, I ordered like 100 copies of it." And she goes, "You ordered 100 copies of a comic book? Are you stupid?" And I said, "No, I'm not stupid. I just have a really good feeling about this comic as far as it, you know, doing so, being a huge thing." And we get to the store, and there's lines around the clock, around the block, around the corner. We come in the store, and the dealer sees me, and he goes, "Oh, come here, come here." I'm like, "What?" And he reaches into his wallet. He pulls up this fistful of cash, and he's like, "Here you go." And I'm like, "What's this for?" I'm
Yeah.
paying. I'm paying you not to buy your copies of Superman because my 25 copies were out the door in 5 minutes, and I have a line down around the corner.
Wow.
And the
Oh,
only way I'm gonna be able to fulfill these guys is if I buy your comics from you.
yeah.
And after that, I said, okay. I took the money and left. And
Yeah.
my girlfriend's like, well, maybe we should stop at other stores and see if they have copies. And
Right.
now she's into it.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. Everybody suddenly was into comic books because, that comic, and literally in the course of a weekend went from being $3.95 cover price to being worth $75.
Oh,
And
green.
yeah, so everybody got excited and they're like, "Oh, I got to start buying comics up in mass quantity, and I'll just storm in my attic. And then when my kid when he needs to go to college, I'm just going to cash them in and not and
Mhm.
pay my kid's college."
Yeah.
And they didn't realize that that's not how it works.
Mhm.
Greed is its own thing.
Mhm.
Um, but that's why suddenly you found them everywhere because people collected. Oh, you have comics here, and they would sit there in the gas station and go through the comics and say, "Oh, this has got a shiny cover. It's got a glow in the dark cover. These are got to be worth a lot of money," and they would buy them all up. And of course, if you're a store and you got merchandise that's going out the door like that, you're going to add more to it. Well, eventually, it got to a point where people decided to cash in their comics at the comic shop. And the comic dealer's like, yeah, these are nice, but I've got like 90 cases of them in the back room that I can't give away. I
Right.
can't.
Hmm.
And so people stopped collecting the comics because, oh, well, they're not worth as much as they thought they were going to be.
Hmm.
There's still collectors. There's always going to be collectors, but the ones that that were in it to win it, from the '90s, are pretty much either gone or have sold whatever they sold and moved on.
Hmm.
So that's one reason. So the sales went from this to this.
Plummeting.
Yeah, and so
That's
now,
interesting. I never considered that before, how the collecting can really impact just like the daily sale of a comic in order to just enjoy the story and get it out there.
mm-hmm. Batman during the height of all that was selling somewhere around 2.5 million copies an issue. Batman now sells about 40,000 copies,
Yeah.
and that's still one of the hottest books in the market.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So comics go in cycles. Comics will be popular again. Maybe not as Death of Superman popular again, but they'll they will rise again. They always have. Like I said, I've been in the marketplace for four decades,
Right.
so I've seen it happen. Um, so when people go, "Why are you doing comic books?" and how could you possibly make money doing that? And like many different ways, the IP alone is worth money.
Right.
You know, it's just that I want to tell a story. I have stories to tell. I can sell the IP later if I really want to, or
Right.
I can license it later if I wanted to. But right now I need that IP to tell my stories.
Exactly. Well,
So
thank you so much, TC. It's been so wonderful talking to you, and I just really appreciate you sharing your time and history and wisdom with all of us. It's really inspiring. I mean, you've had such a long career in comics, and you've really seen that ebb and flow, and all the market trends, and um,
mm-hmm.
you've really continued to be persistent through that. And I just find that personally very inspiring.
Well, I always tell people by the yard it's hard, but inch by inch anything is a cinch. You know,
Yes,
and of course, never take no for an answer. Just
exactly.
keep going.
We're gonna end on that. Never take no for an answer. 100%. And thanks again. And to everyone listening, until next time, I'm Sarah Crowne. This is TC Ford. You can find him can you say your website?
Yep. www.unitedcomicworks.com.
Awesome. We'll catch you next time.
Take care.
Wait, hold on one sec.
Mhm.